What are you doing? The ceremony has started.
Emily's wedding. Even though he was the bride's father, Scott didn't show up at the promised time. He wasn't at home either. Worried that he might have gotten into an accident, I kept calling him. And after the ceremony had started, I finally got through to him. Hearing Scott's voice, I reflexively raised mine.
I got caught up in some urgent work,
Scott said with a laugh. His voice, unlike mine, didn't sound rushed. I was dumbfounded, hearing an unbelievable voice on the other end of the phone. On such an important day, I couldn't forgive Scott for doing this. Then, someone who wanted to talk to Scott appeared. I gently handed my smartphone over to that person. Little did I know, this call would be the beginning of Scott's downfall. My name is Madeline Turner. I'm a housewife who just turned 60. Even though I say housewife, I was working as an office worker at a company until just the other day. I had just retired and was looking forward to being a full-time housewife. My husband is Scott Turner, 2 years younger than me. We work at different companies, but Scott is still working. We met in high school. Scott joined the track and field club I was part of at the time. I'm Scott. Nice to meet you. Scott's first impression, with his energetic greeting, wasn't bad at all. He took practice seriously and was hardworking. Raised by a single mother, Scott was polite and very responsible. But no matter how wonderful a person he was, to me, Scott was just a friend. However, Scott seemed to have taken a liking to me for some reason. He confessed his feelings, and I turned him down at the time, but we met again years later. After seeing you again after such a long time, I just knew I could be happy with you, Madeline. I just have to be with you, no one else will. I want to date you with the intention of getting married. That's how he confessed to me again. Moved by his long-standing affection, we started dating. Scott was incredibly kind, and I spent very happy days with him. When we started dating, we were both working as professionals, so we couldn't find much time to relax. Despite our busy schedules, Scott always made time to contact me, and he used all his leave for me. When he proposed, he had prepared my favorite flowers and booked the top-floor room of a hotel.
I can be the happiest with Madeline.
I truly felt the same about the words Scott once told me, and I accepted his proposal at the height of my happiness. After getting married, we were soon blessed with a child, a boy whom we named Sean. After Sean's birth, I returned to work 3 months postpartum. However, maybe I overdid it, as I fell ill. Still, I managed to juggle work and childcare, and a few years later, I was pregnant with our second child. I was happy, but it was certainly not easy to balance poor health, pregnancy, and life in general. So, one day, as my delivery approached, I talked to Scott about it. Scott, I'm thinking of quitting my job. I thought Scott would accept my proposal. However, upon hearing my words, Scott frowned.
What? Quit? I'll talk to Mom about it.
Okay. I was disappointed that Scott didn't decide right away, but my mother-in-law helped with childcare daily, like dropping off and picking up from daycare. She was a wonderful mother-in-law to me, so I nodded at Scott's suggestion and went to consult with her. Huh?
Quit your job?
What are you thinking, Madeline? Child rearing costs money.
I won't allow you to quit.
However, my mother-in-law's words shattered my hopes. But her words made me clench my fists. But noticing my distress, Scott gently placed his hand on my shoulder.
If Mom says so, let's give it our all, okay? Madeline, you can do it.
Leave Sean and the baby to me, and both you, Madeline, and Scott need to earn a solid income. Don't try to take the easy way out using the kids as an excuse. I bit my lip hard. I'm not trying to take it easy, not one bit. Plus, my mother-in-law must know I've been feeling under the weather. I looked desperately at Scott, but he just shifted his gaze away from me. It was a shock. Later, back at home, as I was feeling down, Scott tried to talk to me. You understand what Mom's saying, right? I get it, but I wish I hadn't brought it up if this was gonna happen.
We're a family, we have to talk about these things. Let's just keep at it, okay?
In the end, Scott never really took my side, always just saying we should keep at it. Thinking back, Scott always used to say I'll talk to Mom whenever something came up. I was foolish not to realize sooner that we were being manipulated by his mother without knowing it.
I won't be a burden to your mom. We have savings, and we can cut back. We can make it on just your salary, Scott, so I'm gonna quit my job.
It was a bit of rebellion against my mother-in-law, but I declared it to Scott. Then Scott started to get really angry, as if a fire had been lit.
I've been saying we should keep at it, right? Mom said not to run away from our responsibilities to the kids. She's never wrong. That's not true. Just because someone's human doesn't mean they're always right. But I've been kind to you because Mom said I should be kind to my wife. You've been happy because of it, right?
I swallowed my words. I couldn't understand his words. Wait, what are you talking about? I started to say, but then stopped. I realized then. Scott was just a puppet, manipulated by his mother's wishes. If his kindness was only because his mother told him to, it was a horrible thought. Everything that had been a beautiful memory could turn sour, but I had to ask.
Did you say you loved me because... Mom said you'd be a good wife. She liked you when she came to see the track meet in high school. So, I came to love you too. Mom's never wrong.
It was both shocking and disappointing. That Scott's affection for me was sparked by his mother's words. But the fact that Scott grew to love me and we built a happy family was true. Believing that listening to Scott, who listens to his mother, would keep us happy, I decided not to quit my job for now and chose to continue working while raising our kids. Sure enough, it was tough. I must have made the kids endure a lot. Yet, we never struggled with money, and once a year, we'd go on a family vacation and have a great time. I was a bit frustrated that the destination was always decided by my mother-in-law, but seeing the kids' happy faces made it all worthwhile, and it was something I looked forward to. It gave me the strength to keep going, no matter how hard things got. But as the kids got a bit older, Scott said,
I think having 3 kids would be nice. Mom says so too.
Huh? I was taken aback. Scott was kind, sure, but he never lifted a finger to help with housework or childcare. We were both working. When I suggested sharing the household chores, he'd say, men aren't supposed to do that sort of thing. Plus, my mom helps out with my share, right? She does the daycare drop-off and picks up, and she helps when you're not feeling well, with a kind of dismissive tone. Again, I half-heartedly asked,
Did your mom say you, being a man, don't have to do anything? Yeah, but that's just how it should be, right?
Scott answered without a hint of shame. It's one thing for Scott not to find it odd, but his mother too. She wants the best for her son and to give advice, but Scott is an adult. I think she should keep out of it.
I've been thinking, isn't it pathetic to always be doing exactly what your mom says?
I blurted out to Scott.
But, following my mom's advice has made me happy.
There was no point in arguing with Scott. Even when I wanted to have a discussion as a couple, it always somehow involved his mother indirectly. Every time Scott mentioned Mom for advice, I was about to burst with frustration. So, one day, I decided to confront his mother directly.
Please don't tell Scott what to do all the time.
My mother-in-law looked surprised.
What do you mean? I just want Scott to be happy. You give your kids advice and instructions too, right? My kids are still too young. They don't know what's right, so I advise them to help them make their own decisions. But Scott is an adult. He can't make his own decisions because he always thinks what you say is right.
My mother-in-law frowned unhappily at my words.
What? Are you saying this is my fault? That's not what I'm saying. I just wish you'd give Scott a chance to think for himself. If things continue this way, with him just doing whatever you say, it's not good for anyone. So, you're saying it's not my fault?
In the end, my mother-in-law remained stubborn, no matter what I said. When communication fails this badly, I even start to get fed up. And so, I left my in-laws' house without having made her understand. A few days later, Scott became noticeably distant towards me. The cause had to be my mother-in-law. She must have said something. Knowing this made me refrain from saying anything. I just carried on as usual. Years passed. The kids grew up and left home. Since my confrontation with my mother-in-law, Scott stopped using the word mom so much. I suspect she might have told him not to use because mom said as a reason, and he's been adhering to that.
It's suddenly so lonely now that it's just the two of us,
I said to Scott one day.
Don't be selfish. Mom's been living alone all this time. She's getting older, and we need to do something for her.
Yeah, I guess, Scott said, looking away as if he felt guilty about mentioning his mom. Indeed, I had been thinking about Scott's words for a while. Despite everything, my mother-in-law had helped with the grandchildren and I was grateful. I had been considering the possibility of living together. Then, one day, Emily called. She was getting married. The unexpected news made me very happy, and I immediately shared it with my mother-in-law and Scott. However, their expressions were not as cheerful.
Getting married, just like that? Without even discussing it with us?
Scott said the first thing upon hearing the news.
Deciding something so important on her own. Who is this person?
My mother-in-law's reaction was the opposite of happy. I muttered apologetically in response to their reactions.
I heard she met someone through work. He seems very kind, and Emily looks so happy with him.
I hadn't met the person myself. My knowledge was based on what Emily had told me and the happy pictures I saw of them on social media. But still, this was the life partner our child had chosen. I felt uncomfortable with Scott and my mother-in-law's negativity from the start.
How can you be so happy about this when you haven't even met him? You know, Emily has always been one to make her own decisions. College, even getting her job was all her own doing.
And so, they started to complain. I interrupted their rant to break the tension.
Anyway, it's Emily's decision. I haven't met him, true, but Emily chose him. I believe she's not mistaken. You could at least trust Emily a little.
Scott laughed off my words as if they were foolish.
Trust? She's still in her 20s, hardly different from a child. Letting such a child make a lifetime decision is madness.
It was clear that arguing would get us nowhere. Despite feeling annoyed by his words, I ended the conversation with anyway, just meet him, please. And so, we had a meeting with Emily's boyfriend, John. Honestly, I thought it was none of my mother-in-law's business, but Scott invited her. Nice to meet you. I'm John. John greeted us, slightly nervous, just like Scott back in the day. To me, he seemed just as good a young man as I had imagined. My mother-in-law and Scott asked him various questions and even showed smiles at times, which relieved me. I thought they had a good impression of John. However, after he left, they started mocking him.
Choosing someone like that, Emily's lost her mind. Really, deciding all on her own. Unbelievable. She must be getting deceived. That smile was so fake. To be fooled by someone like that, Emily is still just a child.
Their blatant hypocrisy made me feel dizzy. They were all smiles in front of him, but turned their backs the moment he left. The duplicity was appalling. My mother-in-law and Scott didn't just talk behind their backs, they went directly to Emily, advising her to reconsider the marriage.
It's terrible. They put on a good face when John came over, but then to oppose it.
Naturally, Emily was rebellious and outraged.
Mom will try to convince Dad and Grandma. I'm sure they'll understand.
I became Emily's ally and tried to soothe her. In the end, my mother-in-law and Scott continued to oppose each other until the end.
It's so unfair to Emily. John seems like such a nice guy, a wonderful person. Never mind whether he's wonderful. I can't believe that she didn't consult us at all.
I tried to persuade them repeatedly, but Scott was stuck on that point. It seemed like a childish excuse, but it had deep roots, and he even refused to participate in the meeting between the families. John must have thought he was accepted when he came over, but he was puzzled by Scott and my mother-in-law's attitude afterward.
I guess Emily's father is just sad about giving away his daughter.
John's mother tried to excuse Scott's absence at the meetup. She must think it's ridiculous, but she seemed to pity me. I thanked her for her concern.
If she wants to get married, then go ahead. I won't help.
Scott eventually gave his consent in such a manner. It was infuriating, but I didn't say anything. John is working hard, and so is Emily. I figured they wouldn't need to ask us for help. Hopefully, as Scott interacts more with John, he'll see his good qualities. I decided to encourage Emily to proceed with the marriage plans.
I wonder if Dad and Grandma will come to the wedding.
Emily, worried about their lack of enthusiasm, sounded disheartened.
It'll be okay. They're adults.
I reassured her. Despite my own worries, my mother-in-law was consulting me about which dress to wear, and Scott had taken the day off for the outfit fitting. Despite what they say, they must be wishing for Emily's happiness. And so, we finished the preparations smoothly and the wedding day arrived. I had to leave the house before Scott because of the dressing.
10 a.m. Make sure you're there by then. Don't be late.
I got it. Scott replied to my call without even glancing away from the TV. And then, it was 10 o'clock. The staff from the venue came to me after I had finished getting dressed.
Scott hasn't arrived yet. What? I'll call him right away.
Despite my warning him not to be late. With that thought, I immediately tried to contact Scott. However, he didn't answer the phone. After several attempts, the ringtone just kept echoing emptily. Initially, I was angry, but gradually I became anxious. And then, I started worrying he might have been in an accident.
Mom, what's wrong?
That's when my son, Sean, approached me.
Dad hasn't shown up. What? Have you got in touch with him?
No, he's not answering his phone. It seems like he hasn't seen my messages either. Sean patted my shoulder, trying to calm me down.
I'll go check at home. Just stay calm.
If he had gone back home, it would be cutting it close to the ceremony time. I couldn't leave. Sean's offer was truly a relief.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks to him, I was able to regain my composure. Every few minutes, I continued trying to call Scott. But still, only the ringtone went on. Then, I got a message from Sean.
Dad's not at home. The house is locked. Then maybe he's on his way now. Thank you.
I told Sean to come back to the venue and waited for Scott. But Scott never showed up at the venue. Sean had returned, yet Scott was still not here.
By the way, where's Grandma?
Sean asked me upon returning to the venue. I was so preoccupied with Scott's absence that I hadn't even realized my mother-in-law was also missing.
Oh no!
A bad feeling crossed my mind. Were they planning to boycott the wedding together? In the end, the ceremony started without the two of them. I was standing by the entrance with Emily, ready to walk in. Originally, Scott was supposed to walk Emily down the aisle, but in his absence, it fell to me. John made his entrance, followed by Emily and me. During that waiting time, I decided to call Scott one last time. And finally, Scott answered.
Yes? What are you doing? The ceremony has started.
I blurted out upon hearing Scott's voice. I got caught up in some emergency work, Scott said with a laugh. His voice, unlike mine, didn't sound rushed at all. I was flabbergasted, hearing an unbelievable voice on the other end. Scott. Look, the train's coming. It was unmistakably my mother-in-law's voice. I was stunned. Come to think of it, there was a lot of noise in the background. They were planning to take the train together.
All right.
I muttered in disbelief. The emergency work was obviously a big lie. But I didn't feel like saying anything more.
Sorry about that. Enjoy the wedding.
Scott's cheerful voice left me speechless. So, I decided to just hang up without responding. After the ceremony ended and during the preparation for the reception, John's mother asked me,
"Where is Emily's father?"
He was supposed to attend. Yet, only I was present during the ceremony, which must have raised her concerns. I answered honestly. I couldn't deceive her with lies and excuses, especially when she had been so kind.
"Actually, it seems he went out with my mother-in-law." "What do you mean?"
John's mother asked, tilting her head, clearly puzzled by my words. Anyone would be. It's unthinkable for the biological father to go out with his mother instead of attending his own daughter's wedding. I found myself relaxing in the kindness of John's mother. Almost to the point of tears because of the situation and my disappointment in Scott. She listened, nodding sympathetically throughout. Then, John's father appeared.
"Is it possible to speak with Emily's father now?"
"What?"
"Maybe over the phone or something."
I looked at John's mother, who nodded. I took out my smartphone and began dialing Scott, then handed the phone to John's father. After a few rings, Scott answered nonchalantly. "Hello? What's up?" "I told you I'm at work, didn't I?" Scott said. John's father had put the call on speaker, so everyone could hear the conversation. He cleared his throat and then spoke into the phone. "Hello, this is John's father."
"John, the guy marrying Emily."
"I'm sorry. Some urgent work came up." Without sensing the mood at all, Scott greeted cheerfully.
"So, that's the situation. Please go ahead and finish up the wedding without me."
John's father calmly responded to Scott's words.
"Work? Was there some urgent work for you?"
"What?
It's rude to say that when you haven't even met me. I hold an important position at the company, you know. If you think I'm lying, you can ask my wife, Madeline. It's not uncommon for me to be called out on holidays,"
Scott said, revealing his anger. Indeed, there have been times when Scott was suddenly called away for work. Even if I thought it was a lie, those words were true. However, there was one person who saw through the lie. That was John's father.
"The reason we haven't met is because you didn't show up for the meetup or here, right?"
"Well,
besides, our company forbids working on holidays, so where exactly do you work?"
I looked up at those words.
"Huh?"
Scott was taken aback and stammered in surprise.
"Sorry to say this, but I've been keeping quiet because I didn't want to create a hierarchy here, but my husband is the executive director of the company where Emily's father works."
Those words seemed to reach Scott clearly.
"The executive director,"
Scott said with a nervous tone.
"This is..." "Excuses are unnecessary. It's your right to act as you please. But do you understand the trouble and sadness Emily and her mother are going through because of it?"
"Well, that..." Scott fumbled, unable to form a proper response. The panic in his voice was palpable even through the phone. Using work as an excuse to neglect your family is inexcusable, especially when that work was a lie. A person like that is not worthy of trust either for the company or personally. "Think about that," John's father said before hanging up and handing me the phone. I stood up quickly, took the smartphone, and said,
"You were my husband's superior. I apologize for not knowing and causing disrespect."
However, John's father smiled and said,
"Please, no apologies. My wife just asked me to help Emily's mother."
"What?" John's mother smiled gently.
"Actually, I had asked Emily a little about her father and grandmother. Emily always seemed worried about her mother, and I wanted to help. Sorry if it was too much."
It appears she had heard about Scott's behavior and work from Emily beforehand. That's why she comforted me without saying much about Scott not showing up for the meetup. I expressed my gratitude.
"Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for the trouble."
"Please, don't apologize. It's a wedding celebration after all." Thanks to John's parents, I was finally able to smile. "The reception is about to start, let's head there." Following her words, a staff member guided us to our seats, and the reception began. Throughout the reception, my phone kept ringing non-stop. It must be a frantic Scott calling, but I didn't have the time to deal with him. I wanted to take pictures with my phone, so I temporarily blocked Scott's calls.
Congratulations, Emily!
Watching my beautiful daughter, I could truly enjoy the reception with a genuine smile. After the reception, when I unblocked Scott's calls, my phone rang immediately. He must have been trying to call the whole time I had blocked him. Hello? I answered.
What are you thinking? Answer your phone quicker. It was during the reception.
So, what is it? Until a few hours ago, I was filled with disdain and anger towards Scott, but thanks to John's parents and the wonderful wedding, I felt more at ease. Contrary to my light tone, Scott said.
Was he angry? I had no idea he was Emily's husband's parent. Why didn't you tell me?
I didn't know either. Predictably, Scott sounded confused and panicked.
That's not good enough. I'm on my way there now. I'll be there soon.
What? You're coming?
Of course. I have to apologize to the executive director.
A sigh escaped me at his words. My daughter's wedding was already over. And yet, he didn't come but is now coming to apologize to the executive director. It seemed he had been on the train, but had he returned? As I went down to the entrance, I spotted Scott rushing in. He seemed to have seen me too and hurried over.
Madeline! Where's the executive director?
I don't know.
What are you doing here now? If you could come now, you should have come from the start.
My voice echoed louder than I expected, drawing attention. However, this helped John's parents notice us, and they approached.
The executive director.
Oh, Scott. Finished with work? John's father said, teasingly. Scott looked sheepishly down.
I'm really sorry about today.
Yet, John's father spoke sternly.
You're apologizing to the wrong person. Have you apologized to Emily and Madeline?
Scott was nearly in tears. My drawing attention meant that everyone was now watching us.
Madeline, I'm sorry.
Always doing as his mother said, and now, only after being told by John's father, Scott finally apologized to me. The anger I thought had settled began to rise again. Where were you? I asked sternly. Scott paused before answering.
I was thinking of going to the spa with Mom.
And? Where is she now? I left her. Scott murmured softly.
You left her? What if something happened?
I said to Scott firmly once more.
She's not alone, so it should be fine.
He retorted. Those words made me question further.
Not alone?
Who is she with? Then, Scott's face turned pale instantly. I had assumed it was just the two of them. But judging by his reaction, there must have been someone else.
Well, you know, the staff at the spa. There are others around.
Scott frantically searched for words, laughing exaggeratedly. He must have slipped saying not alone, but once said, he couldn't take it back.
So, I heard the company band's working on holidays.
Where have you been all this time, lying about work?
Oh!
John's father crossed his arms and sighed deeply. Scott, startled by the sigh, seemed to shrink. I could only guess, but Scott must have someone he's close to. Probably someone even my mother-in-law approves of, and I imagined it was a woman. I trembled with anger. Scott looked back and forth between me and John's father, still searching for an escape. We're getting a divorce, I said to Scott. He looked at me in disbelief.
Skipping our daughter's wedding for a trip with your mother and a mistress? I don't ever want to see your face again.
Scott turned pale and stared at me. Realizing I was serious, he slowly knelt on the floor, still pale.
Madeline, I'm truly sorry. I don't want a divorce. Please forgive me.
I had intended to provoke him, but he started crying without denying the mistress word I mentioned.
As if I could forgive you. I'm the one who wants to cry.
John's mother gently patted my back. Feeling the strength of not being alone, I held back tears and said to Scott,
I'm definitely going through with a divorce. And I'll be asking for alimony. No! Madeline!
I'm going back home to pack my things and leave. Maybe you should go back to your mistress and mother-in-law? Enjoy your trip, I said and walked away. Scott, drawing attention from everyone around, broke down crying right there. I ended up moving in with Emily. It turns out that Scott's company's CEO is John's maternal grandfather. And John's father is the executive and the next CEO. John is currently working at a different company to learn the ropes but plans to take over eventually. Of course, I didn't directly know your husband, but I was surprised to find out he's Emily's father, he said with a smile. Despite the terrible things I did to him, I couldn't help but feel sorry. Yet, it was John who suggested I move in with them.
We found out Emily's dad isn't a nice person, but you're different, aren't you? You've always been on Emily's side, so Emily and I will always be on your side too.
Indeed, there was no mistake in the person Emily chose. I was determined to support them as much as possible without causing any trouble. One day, the doorbell rang. It was John's parents. I hadn't seen them since the wedding. It was 3 months ago. We all decided to have dinner together, called by John. Then, John's father said,
This is hard to say, but we've decided to let Scott go.
What? Emily and I looked at each other in shock.
I was concerned about that supposed holiday work, so I did some digging. If he really had been working, it would have been one thing. But it turned out he wasn't just working on holidays, he was charging personal trips as business expenses.
I was stunned by his words. We never went on any trips. That means he must have gone with my mother-in-law. I buried my face in my hands. How much more trouble could he cause? The room was filled with a heavy silence. Then the doorbell rang again.
Dad?
Emily yelled out, drawing everyone's attention. It was Scott, the executive director. Scott, having been let into the house, didn't seem to expect John's parents to be there. He hesitated upon seeing us, but then apologized.
Madeline, please forget about the divorce. I beg you.
And he was at it again with such nonsense. Since that incident, we had been in divorce mediation. Because Scott refused to agree to the divorce.
Stop torturing Mom. If you're so against divorce, why did you cheat? I also heard about the company money you used for trips. It's honestly shocking to know Dad is such a person.
Emily yelled at Scott. John tried to stop her, but I felt relieved hearing Emily speak her mind. Emily's right.
I had no choice.
Scott raised his voice, then, catching his breath, he began to explain.
Remember when you confronted Mom about bossing me around?
I paused, not understanding what he meant at first. Then, it dawned on me, it was when the kids were small, and I had directly confronted him to stop letting himself be manipulated.
You mean, that long ago? Since then, Mom told me to divorce once the kids were grown. She said I wouldn't be able to see them if we divorced now, so we waited until they were older. And after the divorce, I was supposed to marry a woman she introduced, and that's how that relationship started.
Not just I, but everyone was at a loss for words. To think he had been cheating because his mother-in-law said so, and it had been going on for so long.
But I still love you, Madeline. I don't want a divorce. The affair was just because Mom told me to. I had no choice.
Hearing those words, a deep loathing for Scott surged within me. Was it a visceral rejection?
Don't you have a will of your own? It would be better if you had cheated on your own volition.
I yelled at Scott. But he just looked puzzled.
Why? It wasn't my own will. Disgusting. Get out of my sight. As your mother says, now that they are grown, I'll grant you the divorce.
Scott begged me for forgiveness. But I couldn't stand his touch anymore and brushed his hands away.
I'm truly sorry. Please forgive me.
Mom, let's go somewhere else.
Wait, don't go.
Scott cried like a child, but to put some distance between us, Emily led me to another room.
If you truly love someone, letting them go is also an act of love,
John's father advised as we walked away, finally saying goodbye to a pathetic husband who had always obeyed his mother-in-law. After that, John's parents persuaded Scott, and we were finally able to divorce. But even after that, he repeatedly sought to talk to me. Just in case, I consulted the police. They issued a restraining order, and I felt genuinely relieved.
You heartless woman who hurt Scott.
My mother-in-law once barged into the house, but to me, now divorced from Scott, she was a stranger. I was planning to live with you and take care of you in your old age. Forget about that heartless woman, I said coldly.
I was wrong, can't you think it over again?
However, my mother-in-law, who had insulted me, suddenly put on a sickly sweet smile upon hearing my words. Her ludicrous expression made me laugh. As if I would reconsider. It's good to be rid of that baggage. Please have Scott or his mistress take care of you. You're good at manipulating Scott, aren't you? I said with a laugh, and my mother-in-law, looking frustrated, left without another word. Scott was incapable of caregiving. He hadn't even done housework before. Moreover, I heard rumors that his mistress had left him after he lost his job. It seems my mother-in-law and Scott are in for a lonely old age. Serves them right. Since then, I've been living happily with my daughter and her husband. I've become good friends with John's mother, enjoying trips and happy days together. Thanks to my job, I'm not struggling financially. Sean is getting married, and Emily is currently pregnant, with endless joyous news. Despite the hardships, there's much to look forward to. Life is just beginning. I always want to choose my own path to happiness.